Okay, let's get going. Take two. Sorry about the issues. We believe it was an issue at Zoom's end. Teams seems to be working just fine. I'm going to actually start from the top again. I might do it more quickly because I don't think anyone heard anything I was saying. So hello and welcome everyone again to the Insights People's Future Forecast session based on our Kids Insights data. My name is Jonathan Watson and I'm the Chief Product Officer at the Insights People. You won't just be hearing from me today though. We've got a great lineup of speakers. Sarah Riding, who works with me at the Insights People as a Research and Trends Director. We're lucky to be joined by Ken Fayer, CEO of Epic Story Media. We're also joined by Professor Dr. Ger Graus, Global Director of Education at Kidzania, as well as Michael Swaysland, Head of Insights at EMA Mattel. So a really great lineup. For those of us who don't know, just a quick introduction to Kids Insights. We're a market intelligence service and we help brands understand the ever-changing attitudes, behaviours and consumptions of the next generation. We do this by surveying more than 5,000 kids every single week, equivalent to over 270,000 across the year. And the trends and predictions we'll be talking about today are built on our research across all of these regions you can see on the screen, from Europe to the US and Canada, Latin America, India and Australia. And we've also started working recently in Russia and China too. We continue to work with a huge number of amazing brands across the kids space, like I mentioned, many of whom are either attending or on stage with me at the moment. And it's been a really busy year for us at the Insights People. We've launched our first portal, our latest portal, plus many other features throughout the year. Snapshots, global views. We've launched in 6 new markets this year and produced 130 of the on-track reports that many of you read, and also begun work on a number of new tools as well. So it's been exciting times, a really strange year, and the world in which children live in is still very much in flux, but there are some real trends out there that are shaping their lives that we're going to talk about. So the condensed format today, we'll be breaking the session down into 3 main sectors. Each will involve a short presentation from Kids Insights, followed by a discussion with our guests. There'll also be then a panel discussion at the end as well. So please do throw any questions into the chat. We will have some time towards the end of the presentation to cover them, all our speakers to cover them. So I'm now going to hand over to Sarah Riding, hopefully, Research and Trends Director at the Insights People.
Hi, John. Thank you. Thanks for that. So I'm just going to explain a bit about what we have done with the report. So, as we prepare for 2021, a year which hopefully brings lots of optimism, hope, opportunities, and of course challenges, although hopefully not as many as we've experienced this year. Our team of expert researchers and strategists and insight professionals have collated on producing this annual Future Forecast report. And it's been really interesting and fascinating to do that this year, just looking at our data and how the trends have changed over the last few months, and what does that mean for the future. It's been an amazing project to work on, and these predictions will cover large key trends, elements such as personalisation, digitalisation, and also ethical consumption, which is really important as we start moving forward into next year. And it will also focus on how sectors are changing, for example, the growth of direct-to-consumer and the role of edutainment in education as well. So hopefully lots of things to get you thinking about. But just to start, we've sort of identified 4 key ingredients that we believe at the Insights People to be a key to success in 2021. We believe it's really important to understand all aspects of the kids ecosystem and really carefully define who your intended target audience is. It's important more so than ever to be really innovative. The world is moving so fast, particularly for kids ecosystems. So, develop a strategy that's based on a target audience with a real clean sheet of paper and almost no preconceptions, really. What's happened before and what happens now are 2 completely different things. It's important to test new concepts. Ensure that your approach is agile and one which can easily pivot if required. And obviously, a lot of people have had to pivot a lot this year. And measure and evaluate everything you do. If you fail fast, learn and improve, and go at it again. And that's definitely the elements we're working on at the Insights People. But I'm just going to start by looking at the first of our trends today. And this is all about niche moving towards the mainstream. And as we know, this generation of kids are growing
Sarah, I think you might have automatically gone on mute. I think something got overridden.
Am I back? Hello?
Yep, Sarah, you're back now.
Okay. Oh dear me. What a session. Do you want me to start that slide again, or did you hear me?
No, it was just a few seconds.
Okay. All right. So, you know, what we're trying to say with the niche moving is that sort of many sort of communities are existing online, and it's really, really interesting because it offers really good opportunities for brands to develop real deep relationships with a core group of dedicated fans or almost brand ambassadors. And I'm not going to suggest that having it being part of a community or a group that has shared interest is new by any stretch of the imagination. But what this year has done, it's made us all find new ways of forming communities or forming connections as physical contact has been limited. And these connections, therefore, have moved digital. And it's a world in which children are massively comfortable. And we've also seen supposedly niche platforms like Twitch, Reddit, Discord move into the mainstream as well. So all three of these are appearing in the top 100 Google searches for this year. So, and the quantity of social media platforms kids are interacting with has also developed, and it's opened up more of this opportunity for subcultures to find their voice. So upon the release of Instagram, for example, back in 2010, MySpace, Facebook, YouTube and Twitter mainly dominated the social media landscape. But today there are over 10 platforms that have over 250 million global users. So as that ecosystem expands, there's a magnitude of subcultures in different corners of the digital landscape that have been formed. As kids' time gets more and more fragmented, their ability to choose what they want and when they want it increases. So it gives the opportunities for fans to engage with communities around their core interests and have this really strong three-dimensional relationship between a brand, a character or a product. And brands are going to look to build advocacy by engaging these dedicated audiences on platforms that they're really native to. We might also see children and parents come together to form mutual interests or communities. It's something that we've seen throughout the pandemic, this sort of growth of the family unit and the rebirth of family time. So the communities that involve families and develop advocacy amongst the family unit itself will also thrive. And we believe we'll see more and more brands begin to develop content, and furthermore products engage and satisfy these different subcultures, pushing niche definitely towards the mainstream. And obviously more information on that this will be shown in our report, but I just want to now bring in Ken, if he's available, and just to get his opinion on this. Now, we're really privileged to have Ken on our board of advisors at the Insights People, and Ken has been with us using our data since the back end of last year as well. But Ken, I just want to understand what your thoughts are and feelings towards this sort of niche and the subcultures that exist within this. Has that sort of been seen at all in your business, and how you sort of adapt into that?
Definitely. I mean, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, it's been a very interesting year, and certainly the last few years, and having access to the portal, being a subscriber, using it for bespoke research, been super helpful to really drill in on each of the properties that we represent and are producing. And I guess every property, when you're launching something new, starts as a niche, or you're trying to start with fandom and trying to create fandom with your property and really super serve that. So whether it's been existing for a while that has a sizable audience but not a mass audience, there's ways now that we didn't have 10 years ago. Certainly the ecosystem of broadcast has changed. There's so many services, so every service with the splintering of eyeballs all over the place almost is a niche into itself on every platform. So having ways to target our audience and deliver content and deliver engagement, it starts from ground zero when you launch a new YouTube channel, when you tap into Instagram, whatever it might be, to launch new properties. You're starting a niche right away. And there's so many different ways to reach that audience. It's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. And you mentioned the direct-to-consumer side of things, and that's certainly for us as a producer, creator of content, a distributor of content, a brand and franchise manager of content. Our job ultimately is to take that fandom and obsession, hopefully, of our properties with our could start as a niche audience and grow it to mass, but utilize the out there, whether it's YouTube, certainly a major platform with a ton of content, and starting by building your niche audience and growing it to be larger, but connecting with them, understanding what they love about your property, and ultimately trying to create products that those consumers will want. So, you know, more and more looking at opportunities where we used to go to toy company to get onto mass market shelves. There's a lot more opportunity to serve that audience in a more community-based way and deliver to that audience and to their parents an engaging experience that we might sell direct to consumers. So I never would have considered we are a toy company, and then certainly we work with other toy companies on some of our properties, but we are now starting to look at taking that risk ourselves and developing products, as we know our IP very well and we know our audience very well, and super serving and delivering specific products that might be right for that audience and going direct on a global basis. There's nothing that stands in our way of doing that, and certainly something that we're putting more and more time into becoming that relationship with our audience, taking that next step of products as well.
Great, thanks, Ken. And you know, obviously on that direct to consumer point there, obviously a lot of your business is around licensed IP, but what do you think will change going forward into next year surrounding that? Do you think there will be, you know, the key issues that you face this year that, you know, we're thinking about how to overcome those next year as we move forward?
Yeah, I think some of the big challenges on the content side are there are so many platforms and new SVOD services that have launched. So the challenge for us is to reach audience wherever they are. So we need a strategy on content that has, we call it our hero content, let's say, that might be on a Netflix, an HBO, a Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, but then also all the other content that you have to produce to deliver that on other platforms, YouTube, Instagram, et cetera, social media and direct. So I think the challenge will continue to be retail shelves are very difficult to get onto in the toy world. It's super hyper competitive, and in order to be on a Walmart shelf, you need mass market appeal, and you want to time it right with the right product. So I think the challenge will just continue to get more complex, but we have tools, and certainly the Kids Insights portal and that research is super helpful. You talked about, you know, what worked before won't necessarily work in the future. I mean, this year we didn't expect early in the pandemic that retail sales of toys would be up in the US. I think it's like 19% over 2019. That was not what we were feeling in March, April, and retail is actually, you know, now trying to catch up and order more product. So, you know, being in touch with the trends, having insights, as many as you can, and feedback from others in the industry is critical to try and set your strategy. In the animation space, it takes us 2 years to develop a property and get it out there. So, you know, the things we're working on now that are going to come out in 2 years, you know, we have to have a fulsome strategy to grow that niche to a mass market audience.
That's really, really interesting. Thanks, Ken. And I think we could talk a lot longer, but hopefully you can join us again at the end of the session when we have a bit more of a panel discussion.
Yeah, I'm going to say I have at 12, so I'll stay as long as I can.
Okay,
thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. If you've got any questions for Ken or anybody, just put them in the chat channel, and we can always, if Ken can't be available right at the very end, we can pass them over and try and answer them for you. But thank you so much, Ken. Really, really appreciate it. It was really fascinating to hear your thoughts on that.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Ken. So now I'm going to speak for the next few minutes around edutainment and the role of education. Because as the pandemic caused disruption to the traditional schooling system, as we all know, teachers and parents turn to alternative paths in order to engage kids in both their schooling and education. UNICEF estimated at one point there were 1.6 billion children who were unable to attend school at one point. But while teachers may have turned to Zoom and other online platforms, such as the ones we've been struggling with today, in an attempt to remain as normal as possible, kids have really taken learning into their own hands. Edutainment combines learning and entertainment to make the learning process enjoyable for kids. So with kids away from school, more parents have had to take on the role of the teacher, and therefore content or experiences which are entertaining and educational just make that added responsibility that little bit easier for parents. So this was a trend that definitely accelerated during 2020 and will continue next year as well. And there are countless examples. In France, this trend really shone through via YouTube, with 168% more tweens watching educational content on YouTube year on year. In the UK and US, the types of toys children were playing with changed. STEM toys amongst US tweens experienced a 22% growth year on year in terms of kids who saying it was their favourite. And in the UK, this was even higher at 53%. Also, we noticed in the UK, the amount of kids who were using, at this same age, using their own pocket money to purchase things like science kits increased by over 150% as well, which is really interesting. And what we also saw during the pandemic was that some education institutions were actually turning to embrace platforms on which kids are already digital natives on to engage them. Video games like Fortnite, Minecraft, Roblox had all been started to get used for more educational purposes as well in some instances. Fortnite were probably the most recent one to start doing this. They actually held a course which enables teachers to build lesson plans around the Fortnite Creative Tool. That's the game's sandbox mode, and this allows children to learn things like computational thinking, problem solving, design as well. In these digital worlds, becoming a games designer is actually now one of the top career aspirations for kids. But also the kids could explore subjects of history, literature, and languages too. So it's not just kind of those digital skills they were learning. So I'm really interested to see who else can innovate, utilize new trends like voice technology when it comes to this space of education and edutainment. And furthermore, we saw social media platforms trying to get involved as well to different extents. TikTok launched a new kind of side of the app and a hashtag Learn on TikTok, encouraging kids to engage and create content that other kids can learn from. TikTok really now, it's not just a platform for funny videos. Young people are really using this platform to share information about politics and global issues, and we can see in our data kids who use TikTok are 57% more likely than average to be concerned about the environment and 129% more concerned about racism. So I really think it's clear that this growing platform will have an even bigger part to play in the future conversations about important issues. And as well, the pandemic also changed who kids learn from and who they aspire to be as well. Kids' career aspirations have been changing as a result of the things they've seen around them. They've become less likely to want to become a teacher, being away from school, and more likely to want to become nurses and doctors, which is really interesting. These everyday heroes. And actually, one of the things we found from our research is the realization that children themselves can become the hero. So I think that's a really good time now to introduce Professor Dr. Ger Graus, Global Director of Education at Kidzania. Welcome, Ger.
Thank you. I've stayed on mute as long as possible. My daughter's on her way home from school and two little dogs are getting very excited. So if you hear that, then happy dogs, happy daughter.
We've dealt with everything else today. Ger, would you just be able to give a little bit of information about yourself, your background, and then also the nature of the work that you do at Kidzania too?
So I grew up in Holland, became a teacher, came to England for a year, stayed for 30 odd. I haven't gone back yet, and started working increasingly in areas of significant deprivation in cities mainly. And got very bored with the schooling system, not an education system that is so prescriptive that actually learning is not really the thing. If you think about it, what happens is the government decides what children should be taught. They call that the national curriculum. Schools are the deliverers, teachers are the deliverers, and then we test and we inspect to find out how well teachers and schools have done. And you could actually have a discussion about education in this country without mentioning the word child once. So I started focusing on out of school learning, because I think that if you teach in school, then you can learn out of school, and with a bit of luck you can straddle the two, and effectively you then get to a point where the environment is the third teacher, and that of course includes the virtual environment. Then I have this thing that we don't really know our kids very well. I think we know their test results, and we know their attendance, and we know whether they're gifted, talented, or have special needs, and we know whether they're naughty or not. But we don't know what flavour crisps they're like, or any aptitudes or whatever. So I'm delighted to be working with you guys, because I think the better we get to know our children, the more we can tailor their provision in terms of skills, competencies, and confidences. Because the one thing that is undoubtedly going to happen is my granddad had one job, I had 5 or 6, my kids are more, and I'd quite like them to look forward to change rather than constantly be scared of it. So at Kidzania, we use the data on 90 million children over a period of 20 years to find out what their preferences and what their behaviours are, and we inform the education system of that. I work with Council of Europe, OECD, and a whole range of universities to try and make the world a little bit better. And so essentially, educationally now, we're really seeing that every child is everyone's responsibility. And there we are, really.
Amazing, thanks. Yeah, and it really important, the distinction you made there between education and schooling, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think the other thing that I'd just like to pick up on, if I may, is that we talked a lot about children taking learning into their own hands, and they're very good at this. To begin with, they were born to do that. Children were born to live and to learn. And then we send them to school, and schools kill creativity, or they're made to. And they kill self-directed and self-sustained learning and self-initiated learning. And the pandemic was a kind of accident that allowed the kids to claw some of that back without us grown-ups knowing. So it was a bit naughty, but quite nice, really, and good for them that this happened. And in teaching terms, schools have now had to make technology a top priority. I think one of the things that the pandemic did is it didn't make us invent new things. It made us live with urgencies in a different way. But we must not kid or flatter ourselves, because a very significant percentage of children do not have internet access at home, or live in homes that are not conducive to learning. And to a very great degree, this discussion has been ignored, and we've made the discussion a middle class discussion. And if we're serious about equity and equality, we must urgently strive for internet access to be free in children's homes. Like free school meals, the internet access for those children, if they want to be like others, is a human right. And we need to come to terms with that as a society, and not just rely on government. I think we just need to force that agenda, and the better we know our children, the better we will be at forcing that agenda. So we're going to come full circle, I think.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We mentioned Fortnite, Minecraft, Roblox, TikTok, but it all comes down to whether people have access to these platforms and other platforms like Zoom or whatever remote learning was being done on. And I guess there's also a question around the quality of education, isn't there, that platforms, these digital platforms, can provide too.
It's an interesting one and a dangerous one, and I think in the next year or so we need to start to seriously grapple with this, because the minute you start to formalize things, what is quality, what isn't quality, that counts, that doesn't count. The minute you do that, you fall back into the realms of teaching, and you take the creativity out of it, and you become part of the schooling thing if you're not very careful. On the other hand, if you just let it be, then there's going to be some really good stuff and there's going to be some rubbish. And maybe we need to focus less on the content per se and more on the children as the consumer and their ability to judge for themselves what's for them and what isn't, and what's good and what isn't. It's an interesting discussion, and I think we should have those across sectors. So from schooling to education to edutainment, to market research, we should collectively have that discussion, and then we will get it right more often than not, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that kind of links into the screen time conversation as well, because we noticed when COVID first hit, parents are really happy to spend more time with their children. Now there's been a bit more fatigue, and perhaps the conversation around screen time will come back around as well, which is really relevant too.
Yeah, and I think that's about purpose as well, isn't it? And you know, these things always go a bit like a pendulum. I think many parents have found out, including myself, that I wasn't very good at chemistry, physics, or biology, and I used to then very quickly go to my daughter, "You better look that one up." Whereas if it's history or English or any of the other ones, I'm kind of all right with it. I think it's always about balance, isn't it? And it's always about hybrid. You know, will screen at any time replace real experiences? No, I don't think so. Can it make them much better and much more exciting? Absolutely. Who should judge that? Predominantly the user, i.e. the child. And I think we need to perhaps reinvent our own roles as teachers, be it the parent as a teacher or the teacher as a teacher, more of facilitators of learning and lollipop people to quality, not quality control, but to safeguard. And apart from that, then let the kids find their own way around this as much as possible.
No, I agree. Just one last question, Ger, as well. You mentioned, you kind of touched on it there, but could you maybe just tell us a little bit about edutainment in the physical environment, perhaps around what the kind of educational experiences that go on at Kidzania?
So one of the main, so the city is built for children. They're about 80,000 square foot. They have about 60 to 70 real life work-related activities. So there's a real aeroplane where you can fly using simulators, you can do a liver transplant, you can be a television presenter, you can clean windows, you can change the tires on a Formula E car, and. The main thing about it is that the minute you enter with your accompanying adults, grown-ups are there to be seen and not heard. So I tended to walk around London, I think much Kidzania and London, much to the annoyance of some people, and I would say to the grown-ups, can you just go and have a coffee now and leave the kids be? This isn't for you. And parents particularly would struggle with that tremendously. I think teachers got better at that. So in a sense, you're back to that the environment is the third teacher and you utilize that. And I used to love it when kids told me that they didn't like something because they'd given it thought to form a judgment that this wasn't for them, rather than being told what you can and what you can't do. And I think that kind of experience-based learning, if that's done well, then it allows children sometimes to understand why going to school isn't such a bad thing. So if you walk away with the front page of a newspaper that you've just produced with your friend, and somebody reminds me that you wouldn't have been able to do that without having learned English at school, there is that thing. And I think to conclude that, I travel all over the world, although sadly not at the moment. And I talk to lots of kids, and the question I ask them is, why do you go to school? And the answer I get far too often is because I have to. And I think it is our job to let them find better reasons and write their own narrative of the possible. And we have to do that not by telling them, but by providing free range learning opportunities for them to find out, online or offline. And I'm looking forward to Kidzania becoming more online so that we can begin to join things up, or rather let the youngsters join things up for themselves, really.
Free range learning, I like that phrase, thanks. So we're gonna have to pass on to the next section now, but if anyone does have any questions, we will be having a short panel discussion at the end where we can throw any more questions out. And Ger, do you have time to hang around at the end of the session, even if we run for a little bit?
Dog's daughter permitting, of course I'll be around, yeah. Sure.
Brilliant, thanks. So I'm now going to pass over back to Sarah.
Thanks, John, and thanks, Ger. That was really, really interesting. So I suppose on some of those points that Ger raised then, so while sort of numerous digital trends have accelerated over the last year, there's also been many things that have altered around kids' offline worlds as well. Families are operating much more on levels as a family unit together. So they're sharing passions, they're sharing interests, they're sharing hobbies. And this combined with the fact that we are all, and children in particular, navigating ourselves through this extremely stressful period, you know, a period of immense change in things. We've almost reverted back to some traditional and more nostalgic feel-good hobbies and interests rising sort of to the fore again. And especially for those that are looking for ways to disconnect, particularly from an online world. And we anticipate that these won't be passing fads in the slightest, but you know, this year's experience will all help kids define their interests going forward. The things that we've seen in our data is the growth of arts and crafts, for example, increased particularly in tweens as they turn to creative outlets to sort of help as a form of escapism. And we've seen the popularity of jigsaw puzzles increase also. Around a fifth of 3 to 10-year-olds in the UK are playing with them at the start of the pandemic than they are they were this time last year. And in the US, we noticed a 72% year-on-year increase in the number of tweens playing board games with their parents as well. And at the peak through lockdown, 45% of these were playing Monopoly and Uno as a family unit. So really coming together to enjoy those more traditional sort of pursuits. And looking ahead, we can expect to see more innovation, we think, in this board game market. And if we look at the way that those traditional games are sort of advancing with digital elements as well, so sort of breaking into that digital world that many kids are accustomed to. And already we've seen brands like Nintendo innovate in this space, you know, merging a digital gaming experience with a traditional customised board game. And the amalgamation of digital and physical as the lines continue to blur will be a key trend as we move forward into 2021. But will we see this trend continue as we move into normality? We think so, and we think there are lots of gaps in the market for offline experiences for families to enjoy. And, you know, kids who found passions during lockdown, we imagine will be shared a lot more with their friends as they sort of return to mingle on a sort of more normal basis. We also predict there's probably going to be a new emerging mutual family entertainment platforms, and we might even see some platforms like gaming, for example, video gaming, increasingly become the platform that families come together, and it overtakes traditional media as a hobby for all the family to enjoy. It's certainly something that's been happening in my household. But I just want to pass it over now to Michael, and I don't think we can think of anybody better to talk about the popularity of offline games. Michael is the head of insights across EMEA for Mattel, producing many board games, notably Uno, which has certainly been played a lot in my household over the past year. But Michael, I know that you have been doing a lot of work with your insights team as well around what this actually means and that return to these sort of nostalgic traditional hobbies. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's good to be here, guys. I think the thing that's really interesting over this period is just, you touched on it earlier, is this drive to get back to nostalgia, right? I mean, I think families were at home with their kids, you know, bearing the circumstances that there is a lot of inequality, and that not everybody from a household time had the same amount of time to spend as a family over this period. But what we're seeing through your data and other data sources is that there was just a lot more connections with their families and kids, seeing things from their kids' perspective for the first time, being at home for dinner even, enabling them to see what happened during that afternoon and day. Is something that I think for a lot of people was not really something they were in touch with. And therefore this harking back to, well, I'm spending 9 hours in front of my screen a day because you're no longer hanging those disconnects of meetings. My kids sitting there doing their schooling either through a computer or watching TV or playing games. How can we disconnect? And I think we saw that through March and April with the incredible boom that we saw in gaming that caught a lot of people, I think, off guard at that point in time. I think it was just a great decompression and getting back to more traditional ways. You've seen it with 80s entertainment coming through, right? So that harking back to things that are coming through from a content perspective. We're seeing it through, you know, Motu as a brand of ours that's being rebirthed from the 80s for the modern world. And these are things that I think are resonating with people at this time, where they can turn off the screen and absorb things in a more human setting when they're spending the rest of their days looking at that screen in front of them. I mean, I think kids' viewing time must have gone through the roof right through this period, not only from gaming but through TV content and the like with YouTube. And you know, just parents want to get their kids off that screen. And I think board games was a great way for them to be involved in that play pattern rather than, you know, traditional patterns like dolls or vehicles or things like that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I know that you've been doing quite a bit of work around mental health and, you know, making sure that, you know, the brands that you help play a role in helping children sort of navigate through sort of more stressful times. And can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I think, you know, this is a period of time that's really important for everybody to be a little bit more empathetic, right? So we've been doing a partnership with the University of Cardiff for a number of years now to really try and understand what are the benefits and how can we help children to be better through that developmental stages of their early lives. And we've just released something a few months ago that was talking about you know, play patterns and how playing with dolls in this case helps children improve their social empathy and information processing skills, which we thought was really important because, you know, parents often sitting there doing their work at home, running around, not necessarily being able to give their kids the full amount of attention they deserve, can often throw them in the corner with their tablets or with their toys and expect and just feel a little bit of guilt in the background. But we know that through this work that playing with dolls is able to enable kids to develop empathy more so than if they were doing something like tablet play. And the reason why we think this is important and something that we're going to be doing on a longer term basis is we have kids that are being exposed to so much these days, right? They're probably being bombarded with more media and more messages from a younger age than any other generation before them. And they can often educate us on things. So the more that we treat them in a way that can harness that for the best, I would say, the better it will be for all of us in the next generations to come.
Great, that's really interesting. And Michael, just looking forward into sort of next year, and I know that there's some innovations around Barbie and that sort of thing, but what else have you got that's quite exciting that's happening in the world of Mattel?
Well, I can't tell you about our launches for next year, but I think the main thing that we're looking to for 21 and beyond is, you know, what stays from the trends that have been happening this year and what dissipates. So what has been accelerated through the very different year that we've had around you know, play patterns with children, family time, the seek for a balance between screen time and physical time, getting kids to actually be active while learning their digital skills and harnessing it. And I think the 21 for us across multiple areas will be focused more on getting that balance in place and ensuring that we can help families and do that in a more easier way rather than having to stress about one extra thing.
Yeah, it's fascinating, really interesting. Thank you so much, Michael. And it'd be great if we could open up the panel now and hopefully get some of a quick bit of Ken's time before he needs to dash. Can we invite everybody back into the...
Yeah, I think if we just show your cameras again. Oh, there we go, Sarah. I think everyone's on screen. Who's on the panel now?
Okay, perfect. Thank you. It'd be interesting, Ger, actually, you know, to get your thoughts on this role of traditional pastimes, or, you know, going back to sort of almost nostalgic, you know, ways of families sort of coming together, you know, almost in sort of complete contrast to sort of the digital sort of world that seems to be dominating many children's lives.
I think we are certainly expecting across the piece globally in Kidzania's, once we're safely allowed to reopen, etc., we're expecting an increase, particularly around the family visits. And I think for that very reason, that it is physical, it's hands-on, it's out of the house, it's children being allowed to explore. I think we will see this. I think we will see, for different reasons, school visits increase. And I think we also need to capitalize on this. I mean, I've advocated this for quite a while, for years. I've never understood why schools don't set family homeworks, for example. Why would the youngster come home and the parents complain? Why can't we just say, right, okay, here we go, and screen time can become a part of that. You're going to watch that episode of David Attenborough together, and if you don't watch it together, the homework's not complete. Because I think it's not about either or. I think it's about how we encourage engagement. Yeah? The parents who will say to me, well, my son's up in his room all the time watching television or on his iPad. And I'm kind of going, well, who bought him the iPad and who bought the telly? And why did you buy it? Because you wanted to watch the big one downstairs. So I think there are issues about, it is easy to blame the technology. It is easy to blame something else. I think we need to encourage people to take a good look at themselves. And if we really want to do stuff together, it is our behavior that needs to change. And technology can actually be a brilliant tool, as can all the amazing stuff that Mattel produce and all the others, and that you do at Kidzania. It is about behavior rather than anything else. And I mean, you know, I hope that we will, I think we will see much more disruption next year in edutainment terms. I think we will see much more confusion, partly because governments don't know what to do with the disruption. And I think we should try and learn from that disruption, particularly around behaviors. And that includes behaviors around technology. And then, you know, I hope for decency, respect and kindness led by the Marcus Rashfords of this world rather than by presidents and prime ministers, really. And again, that's about behavior. We should stop looking at technology as something that sits on its own. I think that's the point.
I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to jump. A lot of very interesting topics, and I'm sure we could talk all day. But thank you for having me, and thank you for the topic. Super interesting, and you know, I'll continue to use Kids Insights and work with you guys, because as you said earlier, how it worked in the past we can learn from, but we've got to have new ways of doing things going forward, and disruption is a great term. It's going to continue to be disrupted. I totally agree. Take care, everybody.
Thank you so much, Ken. Thank you very much.
Michael, I've got one question for you, if that's okay. It's around kind of price points in the toy industry, because we've seen that the pandemic's obviously starting to cause more financial constraints on families. To what extent are we seeing them actually making more considered purchases, buying products and services that offer a kind of more of an educational element, as well as just being a kind of a throwaway toy? Is that a trend that's happening in the toy industry at the moment?
I think it's very mixed, and I think that there's a whole bunch of trends that are going on at the moment this year, right? I think the beginning of the year we saw the boom of games and the boom of arts and crafts and all those areas that were much more nostalgic, feel-good family things. We, at the same time as we saw that, we saw the boom of really expensive stuff, right? With families who have a lot of money and spare at hand because they weren't traveling and they weren't going on holidays and they weren't doing that stuff, utilizing those funds to keep their kids happy by buying the top of the range stuff they would normally get their kids for Christmas. On the other end, there are families that are tight through this, and you know, that are being constrained. And I think that's one of the things we need to look at as we go into the Christmas period. We saw during the early parts of lockdown, when stores were closed in a number of markets, and particularly in the UK, where lower priced items actually didn't sell very well, because a lot of those were impulse categories. That where people are not in store, they're not picking it up, and they don't tend to fly into the digital world as easily. So the things that you would normally pick up while you've got your kid in store with you are not the things you're going to pick up when you're sitting at home with your phone doing Amazon, right? So the difference that we can see through that is pretty clear. How that changes now in the run up to Christmas, you know, what will happen with gifting? How are we going to gift if we're not spending time in families' houses? Would we buy more nostalgic gifts because we're not being exposed to the new brands to the same extent as we would in a normal year because we're not in store to the same degree? So there has been a lot of default to the big traditional brands, the brands that people know that have been around a long time, more so than some of the newer entrants for this year.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I'm just going to see if there's a question in the chat, I think. Yeah, there was one. It was mentioned earlier about how TikTok users are more invested in social and ecological issues. We're wondering to what extent parents consider ethical issues when purchasing for their children. Do we know about that? Who wants to go first on that?
I mean, I can speak from my own perspective here. there's definitely a lot in terms of sustainability and that ethical side that's coming through, right? We know the messages around diversity and inclusivity, but we also know the messages that are coming through around the planet that we are living in. Kids obviously are being exposed to so much in schools these days. So it's very often that kids might be informing their parents more so than their parents informing the kids on certain topics. Kids are well aware of damage from a plastics perspective. So there is pester power, but I think there is a difference in markets. So if we look at the Scandi Nordic region and Germany, there's a lot of pushback on plastic products, and there always has been, but that's being heightened. In other markets, it might focus on plastic issues from a packaging perspective, whereas in others, it actually might be the physical product itself. So there's a lot of nuance and difference, and I think we need to look at it from a country-by-country case study as well.
Yeah, interesting. And then, Go, when it comes to sustainability, one of the things we mentioned was about how kids are now aspiring to be heroes themselves. They're not aspiring to be celebrities and social media stars. Instead, they want to be scientists and doctors and nurses. And to an extent, that also kind of fuels the trend for sustainability and eco and environment, because these kids now they realize they can make a difference themselves. So is that kind of something that Kidzania take into account as well? Is there any kind of educational aspects around the environment at Kidzania?
So yes, there are, and there are certain businesses we would not engage with. But I think for me, the highlight of that finding, your report, really was that children react to circumstances, and so circumstances become role models, if you wish, in a strange kind of way, and they make good judgment calls. And as Michael said, you know, children are more aware in many circumstances than parents about climate change and those kind of matters. So I'm hugely optimistic, and it also allows us to not to forget that we are role models, and that our behaviors get copied, and that we have a collective responsibility as industries and as individuals to demonstrate the right behavior and to demonstrate the right thing. And at the moment, I think the most important one, given the state of mental well-being also, the most important one, I think, is the role model kindness and care and respect. And children do that also better than we do, I think, but we do need to lead by example, and we do need to be aware of it. So that report that you published filled me with a great deal of optimism. I'd much prefer the child who cares than the child who wants to fly, although there's nothing wrong with flying either. I get that bit. Yeah,
there can never be too much optimism at the moment. Guys, we're going to wrap up now, unfortunately. Thanks everyone for their time. We have recorded the session, and all attendees as well will be receiving a copy of the reports in the next few minutes that we mentioned. We'll also be sending a link out with the video recording as well. Everyone also should have access to our data portal when they signed up to access any of our other free reports and have a play around with the data. Please do reach out if you have any other questions on email, on Twitter, LinkedIn, social media. We're more than happy to chat at Kids Insights. But otherwise, thanks again to all our special guests. Ken Fayer, CEO of Epic Story Media, Professor Dr. Georg Graus, Global Director of Education at Kidzania, and Michael Swaysland, Head of Insights at EMA Mattel, and of course Sarah Riding, Research and Trends Director at the Insights People as well. So thank you all for listening. Thanks for persevering through the tech issues and the switch of platform. I hope one day we can see you all again in person. But thanks again, everyone, and we will see you all soon.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye now.
Thanks very much.